So in the old game books, usually your character is defined by some stats, usually numerical. Uh, but it means that the author cannot have um, good connections between the story and the character. So you need to, as an author, you need to create very, say, generic stories so different types of characters can fit in. But how to achieve the situation that the player is more connected with the character and the character is more rooted in the story? What do you think, Dave?
Well, again, I think that's a legacy in early game books from role playing, because in role playing, you want the player to have freedom to create their character and have complete freedom, really, within whatever the setting is to create that character. And so a lot of game books followed that idea that you just roll the stats and you make up the personality. But of course, if you're delivering a story, as you say, you very often want to tie why is that person the protagonist of this story? And um, that's a tricky one because one of the things I've always felt is that um, the lead character must be potentially male or female because the player might want them to be male or female, which has made if you're saying um, you're having characters address NPCs address the character, you need to acknowledge that they could be male or female, but um, actually giving them a name and an identity, you're asking the player to make more of a step than they would in role playing. I would hate to be given a role playing character and told your name is such and such. I want to have some control there. But because we're saying story is important, increasingly important in game books, we need to present them with an established character. And I mean, the point of Alex Dragon is that they could be male or female. And we give a limited amount of background, which is configurable so that it's up to the player whether they were in the police or the military or whatever their background was. Um, in open world game books, you want complete freedom, but I think even there, looking at, say, the Steam Highwayman books, Martin Nauch has done something very interesting where he knows the main character will be a highwayman in a steampunk world, but he's then allowed the player to decide what the motivation is, what type of highwayman they are. So even within what looks like quite a narrow framework, this will be what you're doing in the book. He's giving you a lot of motivational bandwidth to decide what kind of attitudes you have. And I think that's obviously that kind of thing is great in open world. I think increasingly what we'd have to see in single story game books is that you are given a character and that because then the character's story can really be tied to the events like in Whispers Beyond the Stars where we start with Alex coming out of prison. So we're saying, there has been a crime. Alex doesn't remember it because he or she has had a mind wipe as part of their rehabilitation process. So we're giving some freedom to the player uh, to imagine their personality, whether they're hard boiled or whether they were framed or whatever. Um, but we know that when people address that character, there is a history which we can have other characters respond to, which I think makes a much richer story, obviously. I mean, it would be awful to read a novel where the main character was simply a blank slate, would be very strange.
Yeah. And I think this is some kind of direction for the modern game books. Lately, I read the game book of German authors Samora, City of Lies. And it was exactly the same model that this is an urban fantasy with the character of young female police woman, right?
Mhm.
And this is very important to the story that she's young and she's a policewoman, not the policeman, right?
Mhm.
And a lot of things in the story is related to her gender and to the fact that she's young. So there was no possibility of select any skills, but there was other mechanics during the game that compensated it. And I felt very comfortable in this story because I let author to tell me the story, right?
Hmm.
Okay, as you said, when we play the role-playing games, we are more responsible to the story as a player as well, right? Because we we need to invent the events that we have influence on the direction where the story goes. But here I was rather curious what author invented and what he has for me, right?
Hmm.
So and I found it like very refreshing. So I'm very happy that we went in the same direction with Whispers Beyond the Stars. Because I think it really makes sense both from the author, likewise from the player perspective.
And also because players are more used to computer role-playing games, and typically, you're playing Geralt and or whoever, you're told this is the character, and we're we're given a bit less freedom, but what compensates us is a much richer storyline. Um, of course, in a computer role-playing game, there's that question of, are you playing Geralt or are you watching Geralt and kind of advising? But then another question is whether game books always have to have second person. Um, the A game book could equally well be done in the first person, and they could simply be asking the player. That's actually what I did with the Frankenstein game book
Mhm.
app. Was Victor Frankenstein is narrating it in the first person, and you're a confidant whose advice he's asking. So um, there are lots of experiments still to be done. I'm surprised more of them aren't being done in English, but I'm sure they are being done in the very rich field of Italian and German and French and so on game books. Yeah.
And also, I think we got to the point that Gamebook does not need to address all the players' need,
Yeah.
all the player needs, because for last 10 years we observed the rising popularity of small solo RPGs, like for example Iron Sword or Entity, where you just take the rules, you spend like, I don't know, 30 minutes reading these rules or 15 minutes into this rule and you play and you have a lot of tables and you just create your story for your own. And you play by your own, so this is the need what you usually fulfill by playing game book. But you have a lot of options that you can uh, shape your story into direction that you want, and there is a lot of tables and all the randomness, but also you can change the course of the story how you want. So I think that this is very good that right now players have has different things to choose from, right? If
Hmm.
you really are curious what the author prepared for you, then you can follow with the game book. If you want to create your story by yourself, but you need to have some tools to shape the story, you can go with solo RPG. And also, if you are more into some physical components, you can go with the board games. So this is much better than we had even, 10 or 15 years ago, right?
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah.